And we're back on the episode. We are talking all things top 2021 in our season 3 finale, where we come together to talk about our favorite things from pop culture over the last year. What are we focusing on now? We are focusing on TV shows. My name is Christian. I'm the host, and I'm joined as always by my two best friends,
Chris Conkling
and Brian Dupree.
And what a year for TV it's been. I think TV's been taken over for the last couple of years as far as where so much effort is being thrown towards these streaming services needing to keep content on. You know, Netflix, it will not let me finish something within 5 seconds of being like, you want to watch this now, don't you? And
it's a race to get the remote. Oh my God. When it comes to Netflix.
All the time.
Always.
But all these streaming...
Netflix has no regard for credits whatsoever. Like, fuck the people who made the things that we stream.
But a lot of effort has been made to put a lot of content out there. So TV shows are naturally a great place for this to be. So there hasn't been an abundance of TV shows. We did have one new entry into this running this year, which was, although Disney had started Disney Plus with The Mandalorian, which was a success, this was the year that we started getting the Disney Plus originals for the MCU. WandaVision started, I believe, in February, right? Am I mistaken, Chris?
I think it was January.
January. Like, we got them right off the bat, and it was interesting because we had kind of been pent up since Endgame. There was delays in the MCU's release because of the pandemic, and this was the first time that the MCU expanded into TV proper, as we'd come to find out. So, did any of those make our top seasons of TV? We shall see. But let's dive into it. The way we're going to do this is a bit different than the last section. We're going to go through and do our number 3s and cycle through until we get to number 1, similar to the way that we're going to do our top TV shows. But gentlemen, did you have anything to comment on the landscape of TV in the past year that you can mark as different or substantive?
All I'll say is that, you know, television is still going strong. We've seen a boom in television kind of since Game of Thrones. People are starting to realize that long-form storytelling for certain properties might be the best way to go. And with, you know, production budgets rising for television, I'm not going to say it's the best case always, Brian. Come on now. I don't know if our viewers could just see Brian's face, but he was making a face to me. But with the rising production budgets for television, there are some incredibly great pieces of content out there that have come out over the last 5-10 years.
It's kind of overwhelming to me how much TV and how much quality TV is being made these days. Ultimately, I was able to watch a decent amount, but I was definitely focusing on movies more so this year. But in terms of stuff that was a little bit daunting that I didn't get to check out, but that I feel like I want to, Succession season 3, everyone was raving about. Definitely a show that I've been interested about picking up. Seems like it's something worthwhile, but I wasn't going to catch up on 3 seasons before the end of the year.
That's definitely something I want to watch.
The White Lotus as well was another one that I heard pretty good things about and I was kind of interested in. But yeah, there's just so much out there right now. I know Yellowstone has become really popular as well. But yeah, it's undeniable that the budgets and the stories are really thriving in TV right now. So it's kind of a wealth of riches for better and for worse, because you can't possibly watch everything that's great right now, it seems.
This year, Amazon's going to release the most expensive television show ever made with their Lord of the Rings series.
My goodness, yeah.
I mean, you see it with movies, especially IP-focused movies, where they're just, not only are they trying to expand and do the MCU formula, but they're getting longer. I mean, the average runtime of most major motion pictures, I mean, Spider-Man No Way Home was like 2 hours, 20 minutes. Most of these films are way past the 2-hour point. So I find that storytellers are finding that they want to talk about characters, build up characters, have these cross-media stories exist. For better and for worse, and I think that TV is a good format to explore that. I did want to add, we kind of have a return to form. You know, Netflix hasn't done this a whole lot, but certainly Disney Plus followed this model, and they set the tone. The show that one of the shows I'll be talking about is on Showtime, and they followed this format back to the week to week, knowing that garners a lot of buzz for some of your must-watch TV. We've seen that kind of in full stride return to form with things like Succession. still following that format, which Game of Thrones did, but it was kind of uncommon with streaming platforms. And it's interesting to see as these bigger telecom companies have entered the game, they're like, no, we're sticking to weekly. Certainly all of Disney stuff has been doing that. And I think that there's people seeing a lot of value in it.
Yeah, well, what I think these giant, corporations and studios are seeing is that if they go back to that week-to-week formula, their product stays in the public consciousness longer than if they release it all in one giant batch. Things like Stranger Things are talked about really heavily on Twitter for a weekend and then disappear into the ether. But if you have a show like The Mandalorian airing week to week, you're going to get 3 months of people talking about The Mandalorian and getting that free marketing and free exposure. So I definitely... I'm glad that these streaming services are going back to the week-to-week, despite the fact that we have to wait a really long time to see the overall quality of a show, and sometimes that might lead... I've talked about this before on the show, especially when it comes to the Marvel shows, when it comes to fan expectation and speculation and building up these own personal bars, and maybe that's not the direction the shows are going in, and at the end of the day, it's tough for some people to view the products as what they are, because they want to view them as what they want them to be, right? But I think overall it's a very positive thing for streaming that they're moving back to this formula.
And even with that, I appreciate some of the shows will introduce 2 or 3 episodes that's basically a movie length to start it off and then have one episode following each week after that. I'm really a fan of that, and especially, Chris is basically a host. They're trying to, every time they're trying to steal him, but C4S Villains, one of our favorite shows, frequent collaborators, do some really deep dive analysis on this stuff. And it's always fun to get into the speculation and see all of the references that are being made. I do just want to say another one that I missed this year that I've heard great things about is the Underground Railroad on Amazon Prime.
Mm-hmm.
Barry Jenkins made this, and it's supposed to be incredible. Another one that was a bit daunting for me, but I'll come around to it eventually. But yeah, the TV landscape is definitely going through a renaissance of sorts right now, it seems.
It's a similar thing to the music industry where you can't really release an album, you have to release singles. I mean, that's what I've been doing with my releases. And it just helps you try to stay relevant and look busier, right? And have something. But I appreciate even more so from a digestion standpoint, and it really helps with the conversation. You feel like if a whole season drops on Netflix, everybody talks about it kind of the week of that it's released. It's like you feel like you missed out on that conversation. So some of the community aspects fade away if you're trying to catch up on it. So I love this release. It still allows for binging at some point and watching the whole thing as is, but I certainly prefer it. One of my shows is actually not completed, and it was tough for me to make the decision to put it on. And I ultimately came to a conclusion that if it doesn't finish up, it was still worth the ride because of kind of that week-to-week thing. So I think that played into even one of my decisions this year. Very cool. So let's move on into them. And Brian, we're going to start with you. What is your number 3 TV show of 2021?
My number 3 show this year is Hulu's Only Murders in the Building. So this is created by Steve Martin and John Hoffman and stars Steve Martin, Martin Short, and Selena Gomez as current residents in a apartment building where a murder happens. And all 3 of them are true crime aficionados, all hooked on these sorts of podcasts, very invested in them and kind of sleuthing out what's happening on these shows. Tina Fey actually plays kind of the one and only, I don't know if the person who did Serial is they're playing off of this or not, but she is kind of this head honcho of the
like
true
a Sarah
crime.
Koenig type of character.
Yes, exactly. This show immediately hooked me. Chris, we're going to talk about one of your shows that unfortunately for me didn't in the same way. And I switched over to this show and it grasped me in immediately in terms of all 3 of these characters. Their relationship and dynamic is really funny, and they're all immediately identifiable as kind of like, here's their character. And throughout the course of the show, they get fleshed out as you would expect. But maybe some of them know more than they're leading on. They're learning to trust each other, but it's also playing with this whole idea of true crime podcasts and how there's intentional misleads and see how they get there. there's a lot of really great stuff happening here. All of the comedy, obviously, these people involved, and Selena Gomez definitely holding her own in with Steve Martin and Martin Short, who obviously have a long history of having worked together. But the chemistry between them, the mysteries, and where this show goes through twists and turns, it actually begins and ends at the same location in time, and really made it exciting for me to go into the next season, because they clearly had a plan of giving us kind of an answer, but leaving some other stuff to dig into later. As a podcaster, as someone who's listened to shows like this before, it felt like it was made for the people of our generation, the people coming into this, and has a lot of classic kind of sitcom-y dynamic stuff that's happening on top of this. I was kind of immediately hooked by this one. It does some fun, like magical realism stuff sprinkled throughout, very rarely and unexpected, but quite effective because of that. And Only Murders in the Building, I would easily recommend this year as my number 3.
This is one of those shows that I'm disappointed that I didn't get to watch before we recorded this episode. But it was a show that my wife and I wanted to watch together. And you know how that goes when your significant other's like, don't watch it without me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I have time to watch it, but I'm like, I promised her I wouldn't watch it. Like, I'm not going to watch it. And then it just gets away from you, you know? So this is something I'm absolutely going to be visiting in the future, and I'm excited because I love everyone that's in the cast. I'm happy to see that it made your list for top shows of the year, Brian.
And they just do such fun things. Like, one of our characters is involved in plays to some degree, and they kind of do these cutaways that are dream sequence-esque, but kind of just going through someone's thinking process. And they're trying to figure out who out of all these characters in the apartment building are likely suspects, but it's framed as casting a show and just going through and like hearing these different stories. It's really, really well done and feels kind of fresh, even though it's doing a lot of sort of tropey stuff.
Yeah, Chris, similar to you, one that I wanted to check out. Definitely one of those, wanted to watch it with my fiance, but she just started watching it, and so I kind of feel like I missed the boat on it a bit, but I've heard nothing but good things. I think it's a great number 3. That is Only Murders in the Building, which is now streaming on Hulu, and the first season is completed, so check it out. So let's move on. Chris, what is your number 3 TV show of 2021?
Christian, as our loyal viewers and listeners are aware, I am the Pop-O-Holics action boy, and therefore something of this genre was inevitably going to end up on my top 3 television shows of 2021. And in the top 3 slot for my top television shows of 2021, I have placed Masters of the Universe Revelation. It is a show that I talked about both when part 1 came out and when part 2 came out, and I absolutely had a blast watching this show. As I mentioned when I talked about it previously, I was not a big Masters of the Universe fan. I grew up at the tail end, or I was born at the tail end of the 80s, so I kind of like just missed out on this franchise. I was more of a Ninja Turtles kid growing up. So I had seen several episodes of the original cartoon. I had watched the early 2000s reboot of the cartoon, so I was familiar with this world, but not like really involved with it. Masters of the Universe Revelation is created by Kevin Smith, and therefore he pulls all of his resources to make the show. Powerhouse Studios animates it. People who listen to our show will know that we reviewed Castlevania in our first season. Same animation studio. Bear McCreary's score for this show is epic and cinematic, in my opinion, and it's just fun, classic, mythic storytelling. It's still a children's show, but there's so much in it for adults to enjoy, depending on the type of adult that you are. And we're going to get into that a little bit, probably. But this show was able to subvert my expectations and make me love characters that I always viewed as purely commercial. You know, like, I'm not... like I said, I like Ninja Turtles. That show was crafted to sell toys. He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, crafted to sell toys. Transformers, made to sell toys. They're essentially 20-minute long commercials to get kids invested in the properties, to have their parents go out and buy them the toys. And that's always how I viewed He-Man. But what Kevin Smith and his team of writers did with Revelation just surprised me to such a degree that I was absolutely delighted with what they delivered. And I think the voice cast for this show, you have a whole set of A-list actors who have done much better things than Masters of the Universe, but they're bringing their A game and really devoting themselves to the characters in this show, regardless of how small the particular parts are. So, as I said, I just had an absolute blast with this show, and it surprised me so much that I absolutely had to put it at number 3.
Chris, you gave the ultimate caveat, which is it is a children's show that some adults may enjoy. We made a deal, and part of my number 1 or part of my top 3 and part of your top 3, we traded on what we'd have to watch. Now,
we did.
I did not fully hold up to my end of the bargain, and I watched a considerable amount. Technically on episode 7. How many episodes are there? 9?
10.
10.
10 episodes.
God. I watched 7 episodes of this. I watched 5 that I actively paid as much attention to as possible. This show is not for everyone. To its credit, I think that it is far more interesting than the original Masters of the Universe TV show, which I didn't like as a kid. I'm not the biggest Kevin Smith fan, although I have enjoyed it. And I particularly liked his run on Green Arrow, actually the comic book that he wrote. So I have enjoyed some of his stuff. I'm a fan of some of his movies, but certainly not as big of a fan as you are. I've heard all these voice actors, but I'm not steeped into the Saturday morning cartoon. But I think I put it best when I said this is a purified Saturday morning cartoon, in the sense that it kind of gets away a lot of the grit off of its back, and is a storytelling mechanism of one unified story. Once you get going into like episode 3 and 4, it takes a second to get into. I just found almost absolutely no redeeming quality to it from an adult's point of view, right? If I'm about to have a little baby boy, if he's like 6 or 7 and he likes this, I could think of worse things that I would watch with him, and certainly it's not egregious in many ways. And they're having a lot of fun, and the voice acting talent is there. I just don't think there's a lot to gravitate onto. I just find the world particularly bland and boring. The kind of rules of everybody's magical powers seem to just come at will to what they make up. There are some thematic moments that do work, and I think the score does help a lot with that. I think the animation, though, you said it was by the same animators as Castlevania, and I think it has none of any of that style. I mean, it is a show devoid of style or character in its animation. I mean, it is not bad. And that is the best I'll say about it. It is the blocky kind of DC, very angular look. It is very tribute to the original source material. So can't fault them there. But they don't do anything beyond the colors. It has a wider color gamut, and the lines are a bit sharper. Past that, within the opening scenes, there's a crowd of individuals, and they're completely still. So this is one of those things that's made with a very acute budget that is very obvious and on screen at all times. There's some action set pieces that are interesting. I think they spent most of the money wisely with the budget they had. I just found the world completely impossible to get into because so much of it is just background drawings and these characters standing completely still, and it felt like the world was not alive in any way. And as something I'll talk to much later, if it had the same story but really, really impressive animation, I would be like, oh, okay, like at least there's that, but there's not even that to glom onto. You are, based on your history with He-Man, what your expectations are there. Chris, I'm so excited you liked it. I will attribute that there are good things working here. I think for any adult that doesn't have any attachment to Kevin Smith, the characters, or the voice cast, I don't think you're going to get a whole lot out of here. But I'm glad you found some enjoyment. It's certainly not poorly made, and I think a worthy number 3 pick for you, Chris, which is Masters of the Universe Revelations, which I want Brian to watch.
Brian has tried to watch.
I watched the first 2 episodes and was not immediately hooked. So, like I said, I moved on to Only Murders in the Building, which ended up grabbing my attention more effectively.
It's very nicely put. So that's Masters of the Universe Revelation. If you're an action boy like Chris, I think you'll find a lot to like about it. And also the controversy, I just didn't understand. It was very strange to me. The things that people complained about from what you had talked about your initial review, I was like, number one, that character's in the show pretty much every episode, doing the things that character does. And it to me, that was the toxic backlash I was so perplexed by, because it didn't ultimately matter, and it was definitely much better than the original. So that's all confusing. I don't want to come across as negative in that remark, because I don't think those are the problems with the show.
Christian, I want to point out that despite not finishing the show, Christian had a rare opportunity, which was to get to see all 10 episodes at once. And that Netflix decided to split the show in half when it initially released it, making the first 5 part 1 and the latter 5 part 2. And the way in which the 5th episode ends, I can also see how that fanned the flames of the prior issues that people had with the earlier episodes of the show. We don't have to get into it, but I agree with you that it's very silly, but I can see why certain people would think that way.
Yeah.
But speaking to what we've been talking about a bit this episode and last, the new release strategies, this seems like something that definitely garnered probably more, even though a lot of it was negative, more attention than it would have if they released the whole season at once.
Yeah.
So I think it kind of makes sense still, even though it is just
There
toxic.
may have been one Netflix exec that was like, if we only release these first 5, oh my God, people are going to be pissed and they're going to hate it. But you know what? They're going to talk about it for months.
They're going to
until we release
like
the latter
crazy.
5.
And I would have been the Netflix exec that was like, anybody who cares that much about this shit, well, I don't care if they unsubscribe.
Ouch.
Well,
all right. Anyway, yeah. I mean, the fact that people would get that passionate about what this content is baffling to me in so many ways. But that is Masters of the Universe Revelations. My number 3 is one that I have been watching with my fiance. It actually has not finished yet. It probably has a few more episodes left, but it is Showtime's, of all things, Showtime's, which I didn't even know we had a subscription to until we started watching this, and she started watching Dexter. But Yellow Jackets, which I think has actually, for a Showtime show, made a little bit of a dent in the must-watch TV mark. This is the Showtime series that is essentially about a young female soccer team, a high school soccer team, that is stranded in the middle of what seems to be like Canada or the Northwest, forestry. And they're kind of separated, and it splits in 2 different times. What's interesting about the show is it splits between them as adults, them as like 35-year-old mothers and adults, and when they were kids and got stranded from this plane accident. And it's got a lot of like things about it. It's very Losty, but I think executing the Losty stuff a lot better. The questions that it brings up are a lot more basic, and there are some supernatural elements to it that it kind of teases at. But it's that wonderful thing where you're like, is there something supernatural going on still to this moment? Is what we're seeing actually happening? And I love that it balances that line. It seems to know its tone very well. I want to shout out Melanie Linsky, who actually, I did that Leonardo DiCaprio meme like this when I saw Up and Don't Look Up. It plays the mother of the wife of Leonardo DiCaprio in that. She has a very small role in that movie, but great to see her. She's excellent, and she plays one of our main characters. Tawny Cypress, Ella Purnell, Sophia Nalisi, Sophie Thatcher, and Christina Ricci, all actresses that are in this TV show. And it's just really gripping must-watch TV. And I mean that in like the best way possible of you're watching it, there's a lot of drama that's happening, everything's really well acted, and there's just this big mystery box of what happened when they were stranded, what are they trying to hide, and you get this element of another character trying to dig up their past, and they all have very interesting backstories. So Melanie Linsky's character is a mother who is trying to navigate essentially losing her best friend to whatever happened on the island and dealing with the shadow of her friend being like the popular team captain and dealing with their parents' fallout and the relationship that she has ongoing and her marriage kind of in a bad place. Tawny Cypress plays like a senator who's like running for either a House or a Senate seat, and she's having to balance her campaign with her past and what's being dug up. And then we also get, let me make sure I get this right, Sophie Thatcher plays the younger version. I think it is Juliette Lewis, who plays the older version of herself. And from what my fiance says, she plays a similar character on The Leftovers. She's kind of like a girl who doesn't have her shit together. She just got out of rehab, and she's trying to balance things in her life, being the mess that she is with what happened on the island. And it's really cool to see both of them, both time periods shown at the same time, what they reveal, what they don't. And it's just very exciting. It's a page turning kind of, let's see the next chapter. Very excited for next week. Me and my fiance have pretty regularly seen it weekly, and it's been a fun thing to check in on Twitter and see what people's theories are and what's going on. So really fun show, very surprise hit out of nowhere from Showtime of all places. I find it very, very watchable. It is my watchable pick for this as like fun, thrilling TV. And I didn't, from movies or TV, I didn't get a lot of that mystery box thriller. This is a very gruesome show too. This is kind of the closest thing to horror that I'm really into. I mean, it's a brutal show. I mean, you see people that are maimed, you see animals torn apart. Like, there's a lot of brutality in the show that is on display in juxtaposition between these teenage girls and in a survival situation. And it has this like brutal man against nature thing that I'm just a big fan of. So very highly recommend Yellow Jackets. I think it's worth all the hype it's getting. Is it going to resolve in a satisfying way? I actually don't know yet, but it's definitely been worth the ride, and I've definitely appreciated it. So that's Yellow Jackets, which is streaming on Showtime. Brian, what's your number 2 TV show of the year?
All right. So last year, both of you had Ted Lasso season 1 in your, I think we just did top 2, if I remember correctly, for TV shows. And partially because I knew we were going to talk about it anyway, because you guys both had it in yours, I did not put it in my top 2, but it easily could have made it because it was undeniably one of my favorite shows of last year. Season 2, I had to give it its credit. So this is developed by Jason Sudeikis, Bill Lawrence, Brendan Hunt, and Joe Kelly, and also stars some of them, and follows Ted Lasso, who is a former college football coach, American football, who takes a job coaching a professional soccer team in the UK. And this show should not exist by all accounts of what TV is generally and what works on television. It seems a bit like
Fortnite-ification, Brian.
I don't know if it's Fortnite-ification, but it's cheesy, it's completely earnest, and it's just consistently one of the best shows on television somehow. It's it never takes the easy road. And this sort of show could so easily go in different ways, but it's always challenging our perspectives on the characters. It never lets us get completely comfortable with any relationships. But with that being said, it also kind of shows what healthy communication and healthy relationships can be in using this soccer team as this kind of microcosm to talk about expressing your emotions. And this season in particular gets into therapy and mental health in some really interesting and beautiful ways that I wasn't at all expecting. Some of our characters take a bit of a turn that you could maybe see coming from the first season. I've heard some people are against this turn. I think it's really propelled me into the next season and raise the stakes, and maybe it's going to become even more, because it's never been soccer focused, but the stakes are always there. There's very little
soccer in this soccer show,
but the stakes and the plot are largely driven by kind of these soccer events. So I think it works, and this season does a little bit more soccer maybe even than the first one.
It's football.
Excuse me. Football. But yeah, I had to shout this one out this year. It's the sort of show that is so silly, but because it's so silly, the emotional moments just hit you like a ton of bricks. They leave you vulnerable. And it's just a beautiful piece of life-affirming, hopeful television that also has one of the best romantic relationships that has been developed in any show that I've ever seen in terms of positive expression. I don't want to say who it is for spoiler purposes, but Ted Lasso season 2, it continues to be one of the best shows in TV for me.
Chris, this was your number 1. Brian kind of spoiling it there, but why don't you talk a little bit? No, it's all good.
That's all okay.
part of the reason why it's probably like my number 4 or 5. I actually have not finished the season, but I can say, I mean, it's the Christmas episode that came out in like July, pretty much earlier this year, is like brought me to tears. I mean, there's like every other episode does that to me. Again, disclaimer, I work for Apple. I do not work for the TV division, but definitely worthy entry there. Chris, why don't you talk about it as your number 1?
Yeah, I think Brian actually explained it wonderfully. So I echo everything that Brian says. This is the most genuine and heartfelt show on television. And this is the second year in a row in which it has been my number 1 show of the year. The second season, like Brian said, just continues to deliver on the same heartfelt messaging. And Ted Lasso is probably one of the most positive characters I've seen on television in a very long time. And the way in which he handles his mental ailments in this season is incredibly relatable, to many people. Here's my caveat. I put this in my number 1 slot because I don't say this often, but Ted Lasso is must-watch television. If you're watching only one show, this is the show you should be watching. Absolutely, without a doubt. I don't necessarily think that season 2 was as strong as season 1, but is still delivering at an extremely high caliber in terms of television. So that's why it ended up on my number 1 slot. It was better than all the other things that I put on this list, and therefore was deserving of that number 1 slot. But listening to writers talk about this season, they kind of view it as their Empire Strikes Back of the Ted Lasso series, which is they've said is kind of meant to be a 3-part series told in 3 acts essentially. So I can see, like you mentioned, Brian, why some people might be upset with a turn that takes place in the last couple of episodes. But if you look at the show through that lens, it makes sense as to why they did that.
Yeah, when they put that
it also kind of spoils
Carbonite,
what might happen in season 3.
Mind blowing.
Sorry, we were talking over each other.
Yeah, when Ted Lasso gets put in carbonite, it's a lot to handle.
It's very
terrifying.
Surprising.
But as I was saying, it also might spoil what happens in season 3 if they are following this kind of like Star Wars.
Well, yeah, sure, exactly. I just wanted to, Christian, I'll let you go, but I wanted to shout out Sarah Niles was a new addition to the cast, playing Dr. Sharon Fieldstone, and was an absolutely perfect addition to this show. Yeah.
Yeah, and I find what I'll say briefly on the show is I haven't finished it. That's partially why I didn't put it on, but also because I saw it was on your top. But it's definitely top 5 TV for me. Just every episode surprises and delights. And really, I think that the true bold move was that I think at the end of episode 1, it could have found this way to launch into more less serialized TV, where it was just kind of like episode of the week. What's Ted and the crew dealing with? And there was a very easy route they could have taken because of the resolutions. Like, it felt like the first season was this perfect thematic resolution to so many characters' arcs, and the fact that they kind of pulled the rug out under and they give Ted such issues to deal with throughout, and all the other characters different routes to take, and things just don't go in quite as right. I particularly love the bold move with the one of the coaches, not Beard and not Ted. It's Nate. Nate's character arc is a very bold decision and very interesting. And I found that very, kind of gets a head on his shoulders, right? And kind of gets a big head, and then that affects his relationship with the players and other characters in his life. And I found they made that turn with almost every character and every conflict and every relationship, where they said, what's real, what is really going to challenge these characters that we love so much. And I really appreciate the show for doing that, because it could have so easily been a lot more of what we got in season 1, which was, there was like conflict, but there was this like spoonful of sugar of like, here's this hope and optimism at the end of every episode. And this series really doubles down on, no, it's going to be hard for the characters going forward. And I really appreciate that. It seems like there were so many other easy doors the writers could have opened. So shout out to the strength of the writing team and the strength of all the performances. It's just excellent stuff. So that is Ted Lasso. That is Brian's number 2. Chris's number 1, streaming on Apple TV+. I'm going to go into my number 2, which is Arcane. I think I really wish it was removed from the entire stricken from the record, which is League of Legends Arcane.
But it's not. It's part of the title.
It is part of the title. I just put Arcane though. But this is based off Riot Games' League of Legends, which, if you don't know, is a MOBA, a multiplayer arena battle, multiplayer online battle arena. I forget what it is, but essentially it's a competitive RPG game that's like really intense. It was based off Warcraft 3, which is a RTS, like a real-time strategy game where you like build dudes and build barracks and have dudes go over. They made this game. It's called League of Legends. It's been out for like 8 years. I remember in college, Chris, some of Marcus's roommates, friend of the show, were like addicted to this thing.
Love this game.
Long running game. I've played it. I'm a fan of some MOBAs. This is like the most intense one, and I'm not like a huge fan of it. So like I've played it for maybe a couple days would be my experience with it, and I was like, it's just too intense. It's too hardcore. The fandom is honestly like the vibe of being in all these games is really toxic and really hard to deal with. But like a solid, it was one of the first big MOBAs ever made. So I mean, there's a lot to be said for its place. But certainly the lore and the characters, I couldn't give a shit. Definitely didn't draw me in from like a multiplayer game. And the show comes out of nowhere. And the only way I would have watched the show was that it just got so much critical buzz for how good it was and how much people enjoyed it. And I gotta say, it's all entirely worth it. So I've watched the entire season. It is the most beautiful animation that I've seen. I think it rivals even Into the Spider-Verse. Since then, it is incredible how much detail, care, and love has been put into the show. And it really ultimately is so smart because it focuses on a few characters throughout the arc. It tells a very long, sprawling epic, which is it's very steampunk kind of fantasy, light like techno steampunk type of thing. And it really focuses on the relationship between two sisters and kind of the world they exist in. And the show is given this luxury of having been in the oven for what I'm reading as 6 years, and really sets a bar for animation that might be a little too tall in order for most shows to pull off in any reasonable production schedule. But the amount of every shot you could pause and it's just a painting, and there's so much detail to this world, again, that I was coming in going, I don't want to give a shit about this. I don't care about League of Legends. And really inviting us in and giving what I think is a Pixar level storytelling through animation, through the way the shots are captured. I think that so much love is paid tribute to the characters that we do have on display. I don't think any of it is breaking ground as far as what you can do with storytelling from these characters' relationships and what ends up happening. I think Chris is going to talk to some of the predictability behind it. I didn't find any of those issues. I did find it like not super fun. It's missing a little bit of that lightheartedness that we may get from something like the MCU or other animations, other animated properties where they do lighten it up a little bit. It's a very self-serious story, but I found it sprawling, epic. The characters' motivations really well defined. The central story of the sisters kind of being raised kind of orphans, getting split apart, and ultimately coming back together in the conflicts that they have with each other, and the warring, city with the riches and the city below. It's very trite storytelling that has been told before, but it's just so beautiful, and all the characters are really well done. The voice acting's incredible. The action set pieces, although there could be more of them, I really don't think is the focus point, but every time we get a bit of conflict in the action set pieces, I think it rivals anything we've seen in modern big budget superhero movies or big action movies. I think it's absolutely beautiful. It is oftentimes characters that we love having to be put at odds with each other, which just, again, raises the stakes of we don't want anybody to get hurt, yet there are these forces coming together. And I think it does that so beautifully. We still get our big hero moments where heroes find their powers.
Sorry to interrupt for a moment.
Go ahead, Chris.
I think characters we love is a bit of a stretch.
Characters we grow to love, or characters that characters that I and a lot of the critical consensus.
I shouldn't have interrupted you.
No, characters that I and a lot of the critical consensus came to love, that I did not have a standing to love. I didn't go in going, of course, God, I love Jinx, she's just so spunky, right? Like I didn't go in going, oh, that's I didn't know who these characters would become. I slowly recognized and went, oh, that's one character that I played. But really, I did not have any attachment to this. And for something that's supposedly like an IP grab for like this video game they're trying to talk about, it didn't seem like the intentions were there. It was the intentions were to flesh out these characters, talk about real stories, and build a real cinematic epic, which I think, in my opinion, they accomplished. It ends on a pretty like stark crescendo. And just to point out some of the things I love about the storytelling, there's this idea of the science and magic that they're discovering, and how some of the old guard is like, hey, this could be really detrimental, but young people that are like, we don't have time, we want to fix these social ills, and they like really push, and it is a dangerous thing they're messing with, but they have the greater good at hand, and how that competes with the upper class and the underclass and the politics. I mean, it gets a lot more Game of Thrones than I thought an animated show was. It's definitely made for adults. This isn't something that's like, oh, it's for kids, but adults can enjoy it. No, this is an adult.
Oh, it's absolutely meant for adults.
And I think it harkens back to the tonality of a lot of the 80s and 90s DC that we love. And it really, like, it reminded me of like Final Fantasy, which part of it, and Chris, kind of the selling point that I was trying to get you on was like, if this was just called Final Fantasy 17, a story that's on TV, I was like, Chris would see this in a heartbeat and he would love it. And I know you have different opinions, but for me, the animation by far, it just can't be debated, is some of the best we've ever seen. It is so beautiful, and so much care and love, and so much unique stuff they're doing with it. I'm a huge fan. That's Arcane season 1. Chris, we did have a bet where I had to watch Motu.
This was my part of the deal, which I upheld.
Yeah.
I watched every episode that Christian asked me to watch.
I actually watched the whole. Actually, only asked you to watch like a couple episodes, and then you made this whole deal.
I watched more than that.
Yes, you did, Chris. So what are your thoughts on Arcane?
I think you make a lot of really valid points. The show is beautifully animated and designed. Christian and I were having a FaceTime a couple of days ago when we were talking about the show. And one of the things that I mentioned, if you've ever looked at League of Legends concept art, they've essentially taken that style and put it in motion, which is a huge feat. The show's beautiful. I'll give it that. In terms of storytelling, and this is going to be silly for me to say because I just said I'm a huge fan of like classic mythic storytelling, you know, these archetypal tropes that we've seen over thousands of years reoccurring within the way humans tell stories to one another, you know. But there were a lot of narrative things that I found to be very predictable. Within the first few seconds of meeting characters, I was already like, well, these characters are going to die, this is going to happen to this person. So I think the show could be truthfully a little more concise. Each episode is about 40 minutes long, and I definitely think they could have been shorter. I think there are certain elements of the narrative that they could have gotten to much faster, and I'm being purposefully vague here because the purpose of our list is to kind of get people to watch these things that we're raving about, so I don't want to go into particular details, but I definitely think the show could probably be 2 to 3 episodes shorter, and it would still accomplish the same amount of things. As Christian mentioned, the voice acting is great. Haley Steinfeld is doing a wonderful job as Vi. I absolutely found the relationship between Vi and Powder, our two main sisters, to be the most compelling aspect of the show. However, the entire time I was watching the show, and I'm happy that Christian was able to separate himself from this. And you know, in a way that I mentioned, like Masters of the Universe is a product that is meant to do a particular thing. I couldn't separate myself from the fact that this is advertising League of Legends to me the entire time I was watching the show. And it really did feel as though this could have easily been broken down into like, and Christian and I have had this conversation, maybe like 10-minute videos released on YouTube to give a little more lore on these characters to get people to want to play League of Legends. So that was one of the things that like really caused a disconnect between me and all the characters that I was watching on screen. And I'm sure I'm in the minority when talking about that, because as Christian mentioned, this has been a critically acclaimed show this year. A lot of people love this show and think it's like peak animation. So I recognize that I'm definitely in the minority for this show. Another aspect that I really could not Can
I counterpoint just the first one?
Absolutely.
And we talked about this off the pod, but you know, there's over I got the official number. It's like over 170 champions, like playable characters that you can buy or unlock. And this show only has 7 of those champions, And like you said, you felt like it could have been more concise. And I'm like, if it was just this marketing material, which I'm not going to deny that it isn't part of like, hey, we want to build up the League of Legends lore, like that is the IP game. I get that, and I will concede to that. But I think they chose story over that because, like you said, they're long. They focus so much on side characters like Powder and who is Jinx, and Vi are two of our main characters, which are playable champions. There's so many side characters that aren't, and that have resolutions and characters and motivations that are resolved by the end of the series. Which, again, admitting that you did not get to, just like
I didn't get to the end, but I finished episode 6, so I watched.
Yeah.
2/3 of the series.
Right. And I think you have a pretty good take for it. Yeah.
And I'll say that I don't know what side characters you're talking about because every main I'll say that like the 8 champions that you're just talking about, I don't think any of them would be side characters. They're all pretty prominent to the overall story of what's taking place. In similar fashion to Game of Thrones, there are like many main characters that the story follows. So I don't know who you're considering a side character, but I think the characters that they focus on.
There's 2 enforcer characters that aren't champions. There is all the council members, and only one of them, or two of them technically by whatever. I don't want to spoil the stuff, but there's like 8 council members. They focus on a lot of them, and only 2 of them are. You know what I mean? So it's not like they only built up a viable IP for the game. Like it just. To me, it's so weird that it came across that way because it came across the opposite to me where I was expecting that. And the fact that it took so long. And again, I didn't do what you probably did, which this is just how you consume media, which is, again, not good or bad, but you like looked up the lore and looked up the characters before you watched it or 3 seconds into season 1, you know?
So I was actually, let me say this. I was, and you and I had this conversation in the middle of me watching this. But I was on episode 4 and I was like, why is nobody connecting with me? Like, I'm muscling my way through this. And at that point I was like, okay, as you mentioned, I know how I consume media. It's a little different from other people. Like maybe if I had a little bit of background for some of these characters, I would be more invested in what's taking place in front of me. So I went out and I was like, what League of Legends, having absolutely no knowledge of any of these characters, what League of Legends champions are in this show? Just give me a little information so I can be like, okay, this is why I should care about, where these characters are going and stuff like that. But again, I'm absolutely in the minority for the show. I do want to mention one last thing about the show that I just found so hard to get over. And Christian jokingly mentioned this when he initially started watching the show. But the score for the show is fantastic. I love it. The soundtrack is garbage and should be removed from the show. Every time they interject a real-world song into the show, I'm immediately pulled from the fantasy world that they are trying to depict in front of me. And I don't know if it's... I'm going to sound so mean right now, and I'm also not using this term correctly, but like every time a Imagine Dragons song popped on or some type of like electro rock punk song popped on, I was like, this is so fucking edgelord, and like I don't want any part of it. Like they're clearly advertising to a specific genre of gamer that loves League of Legends, but like that was one part for like an average Joe viewer that knows nothing about League of Legends that I was like, I cannot bear this. Like just stick to the instrumental score. You're doing such a good job. Like, why do these songs have to be in this show?
That is, Chris, you gravitated towards one of my large criticisms, which I'm not a fan of the needle drops. They are consistent, and by the end of them, the needle drops were like, okay, at least tonally you kept it consistent because you just get them.
It is consistent, I will say that.
And so, cool, you got a vibe. It's
consistent with what the show is trying to portray itself as, without a doubt.
With the pop song. Listen, people like Imagine Dragons. I'm not one of them, and certainly... As not a fan of Imagine Dragons, I concur. Preferred if Imagine Dragons wasn't literally in the show.
They're in the show. There's literally an episode where they have a cameo.
And yes, that is a fair critique. But
I'll leave it at that. I'm really happy that so many people like this show. I'm trying not to be a downer. I'm glad Christian really liked the show. There is a lot of good here. There's just a lot of stuff that I couldn't get past, which is why I didn't have a lot of fun with it.
It made me so sad. It was the most sad I've been since.
I'm sorry to disappoint
you, I was
bro.
An episode into Motu, and I realized what kind of friend I had. No, it really did.
I do like the fact that we essentially traded shows within the same genre, which is tech fantasy, you know? And that's pretty much why when we made the deal, I was like, I don't know if he's going, I had no expectation of you liking Masters of the Universe, but I was like, at least it's in this same weird cross-genre mashup, you know? So that's why I recommended it.
Which one looks better?
Oh, Arcane, 100%.
Yeah. Well, we can agree on that. So that is Arcane, League of Legends. It's available on Netflix. That is my number 2. Chris, let's move on into your number 2, which, as we had mentioned before, we talked about all these Disney Plus shows coming out. One of them rised to the occasion for your number 2. What is it?
Yeah, my number 2 pick for the year is Hawkeye. You know, it's a really recent show. So, you know, similar to what Christian was saying about Halo Infinite earlier, is it because it's like the newest thing that's come out that I love it so much? And I had to do a little bit of thinking about that, but I honestly think that Hawkeye tonally, WandaVision was excellent. There are a lot of things to love about Falcon and the Winter Soldier and Loki. I've loved watching every single one of these MCU Disney Plus shows, but I think tonally Hawkeye was the most consistent out of all of them. And that just put it above the rest. Every episode I found to be enjoyable. The relationship between Clinton Barton and Kate Bishop, you know, Jeremy Renner and Haley Steinfeld, is so much fun. Haley Steinfeld plays this like very energetic, up and coming, wants to be a superhero so badly, and she idolizes Clinton Barton as this Avenger, and he's this kind of veteran superhero who's really done with the game, has tried to retire multiple times, is exhausted, and they're just coming at this one thing from two very different perspectives, but the dynamic between them is so much fun, and the way that the show pans out. It was just a lot of fun to watch. And I also think in terms of Disney Plus shows taking Marvel comics and adapting them, you know, we had WandaVision adapting the Vision comic and House of M in various ways. And Hawkeye, I think most faithfully, not everything is the same, but again, tonally, I think it was able to capture what Matt Fraction did with that Hawkeye run so perfectly. And it was just incredibly enjoyable to watch, and that's why I put it at number 2. Again, I'm the MCU fanatic of the Pop-O-Holics, so I felt kind of obligated to kind of choose the best one of these things. But yeah, if you haven't finished Hawkeye, I highly recommend watching it. It was also a Christmas show, so, you know, Disney knows what they're doing. They're marketing it at the perfect time, the lead up to Christmas. The last episode literally aired the week of Christmas, so it was incredibly festive as well. Who knows how this show's going to play in like July, but you know, in December worked really well for me.
Brian, did you have a chance to finish this? I know you started it.
I did. Yep, I finished this one. Chris, I'm going to be honest. I was a bit surprised by seeing this as your favorite show of the year. I was thinking
second favorite show of the year, Brian.
Excuse me, favorite MCU show of the year. I do agree that the tone is consistent and there is some comedy that's working really effectively throughout. I think the action set pieces maybe did not live up to the highs of some of the previous. There's some exceptions on the back end, especially. There's one character in particular who kind of has a turn, and where they go is incredibly amazing, and I was totally there for it, and it ended up being one of my favorite action moments. But thinking back for me, I think WandaVision is really the one that I find myself thinking and having reacted to most viscerally because of kind of the horror elements that were happening and all of the styles and just how kind of it was a really like experimental thing that they were doing, even though it got MCU-ish at the end. But I can't deny that this was fun watching, and the dynamic between these two characters is really well done. Presenting Hawkeye as a very human Avenger, the hearing loss stuff that they're dealing with caused one of the most heartfelt moments of these shows, hands down, for me.
Yeah.
So all that's working well. But yeah, I'm happy to see it here. I figured one of us would at least have one of these shows on here. I wouldn't have necessarily figured this one, but it does hit that Christmas sweet spot.
And just to speak to some of the things that you said, WandaVision is my second favorite show.
Okay.
But some of the problems that Christian brought up with WandaVision when we initially reviewed it earlier in the year is that you have these really great elements with Wanda and Vision, the titular characters, this exploration of grief and trauma and how that impacts somebody, and how someone in the MCU with superpowers kind of manifests that trauma and how they cope with it, right? Beautiful. I thought that those aspects of WandaVision would have been the thing that made it my number one MCU show of the year. But then you have the latter half, or the other half, which is all the sword stuff and government stuff that Christian didn't like. I found to be fun, but like also kind of pulled you away from what you really wanted to be invested in, which was the Wanda and Vision drama, you know? So that's why I say that in terms of consistency and uniformity and the show being like a completely good product, I would say that Hawkeye is more uniform and more consistent, and overall knows what it is more so than what WandaVision did. But I loved WandaVision. It just, it had elements that kind of brought it down for me.
I will say that I think I can't deny that the character reveals were all spoiled for me. I had only seen the first 2 episodes, and there are
for
2
Hawkeye?
For Hawkeye, there are 2 kind of major character reveals that I had heard talked about on Twitter. So I can't deny that if I had gone in completely blind, I may have felt a bit differently about where the show went, but it's still a solid choice.
I also think those character reveals, I don't want to get too much into spoilers, but that character has been portrayed potentially by the same actor in a much, much better way, and less like just throw it in there and it's just there for an episode. And that's where I come down on Hawkeye. Was like, yeah, it was good. I think the action set piece in episode 3, I believe it is, there's a car chase scene, is the best.
The car chase on the bridge, yeah.
Is the best, and I think that series is at a high, and it does what a lot of these MCU series do, which is they are an intimate story. They peak at like episode 3 or 4, and then they're like, but the greater MCU, and they all fall apart. And that's where I found Loki is actually my most satisfying MCU episode. It's probably 5 or 4 for me on top shows of this year. And that's because that show, like, it had its intimate story, and then the broader MCU stuff was actually, to me, impactful. We haven't really seen the fruits of that, but like, to me, that made more sense. It ended with like this philosophical, borderline like Matrix level concepts and philosophical discussion, where the ending scene was really this clashing of ideas and concepts that to me was the most interesting stuff the MCU can be doing at this time. So that's why I'm baffled that WandaVision or Hawkeye are there. Hawkeye was very fun. It fell apart for me in the second half for sure, where it became less intimate. You introduced other characters, and I was just like, what? Like, it's worse because it's MCU, and that's always the thing that burns me.
You and I should have a conversation about that off air.
Yeah. Oh man, I got opinions of.
I would love to hear them.
Fucking wasting one of the best villains in the world. Oh, it's so bad.
We'll talk about it off air, and I might be able to change that opinion.
Nope. No, you won't. You'd be like, well, don't worry, because he's coming back. There's a fucking thing in there. It was a clone.
That person is not dead.
He was a clone. I don't care. He was wasted in the show. He shouldn't have been in the show, whether he's gone or not. I don't know. Anyway, there's things like that just bothered me to hell. Of like,
understandable.
And just the, I don't know, the stakes of it, and like some shit it just carried. There's literally, I won't even get into it. There are things that at the end of Hawkeye, although I think it's fun, and I do not regret watching it. I don't think it's a bad show. That I just was like, oh yeah, that's right. MCU shit sometimes bothers me so bad, but I think worthy. I think definitely, probably right behind Loki, I would say. So it's a good choice. It's a good choice, Chris. That's Hawkeye at number 2. And your number 1 was Ted Lasso, which we already talked about. So I want to go into Brian. What was your number 1 show 2021?
All right. My number 1 show, another Hulu show. This is FX on Hulu. This is Reservation Dogs. So this follows 4 indigenous teenagers in rural Oklahoma who steal, rob, and save in order to get to the exotic, mysterious, and faraway land of California. So this show was created by Sterling Harjo and Taika Waititi, and is notable for being one of the first that features indigenous writers and directors, as well as an almost entirely indigenous North American cast and production team. Also the first series to be filmed entirely in Oklahoma, apparently, which is kind of an interesting factoid. Yeah.
Well, what else is in Oklahoma?
Well,
Brian, continue.
But this stars Devry Jacobs, DeFaro Woon Atai, Lane Factor, and Paulina Alexis, who are all just beautifully hilarious and nuanced characters who have grown up on this reservation. I I was immediately hooked by this show. It's only 8 episodes long. They're about between like 24 and 30 minutes each. I watched it in 2 sittings, 4 episodes and 4 episodes, just absolutely flew through it. And you get a real sense of the community, even though it's only, 4 hours of content about total. It really establishes this place really well and shows these kids who are dealing with a recent tragedy that befell them in their community, that we kind of figure out through the course of this season what has happened there and maybe what's driving them to want to leave the reservation and head out to California for a new life, a new start. It explores some supernatural things in really fun ways. There's one recurring character who is very much comedic, but is representative of something supernatural. And then there's stuff that's not comedic, a little bit like tinging on horror maybe, and diving into some mythology and folklore type of stuff in intriguing ways for me. Funny enough, one of my favorite characters, who's played by Zahn McClarnon. He plays Officer Big, and he is this tribal reservation policeman. And his character is presented as undeniably a good cop who genuinely cares about his community and the people in it, to the extent where he's not as focused on arrests as truly keeping the community safe and making sure that things are going well for the people there, and maybe giving people benefit of the doubt when they're in a bad situation. On the other hand, he is also this kind of rabid conspiracy theorist who loves spouting kind of all of his nonsense off the internet and YouTube videos that he's been watching. So a character who, it's just they all feel like real people. There's a great episode where one of our characters does a ride along with him, and they kind of like trash this guy, but you end up seeing his relationship with non-reservation white cops, how he's looked down upon. It gives, just for all of our characters, really solid backstory and emotional cores that drive things forward. There's also this drama between some new kids who have moved into the neighborhood and kind of have a separate gang that they're feuding with throughout the course of this season. And yeah, it was kind of this total surprise show that may on its face not seem like something that would necessarily be up my alley, this gang of teenagers, but it's consistently hilarious, emotionally thoughtful, and I just flew through it and can't wait for season 2, which it did get in September. They announced season 2 is happening. So this is kind of a sleeper surprise for me that I was really happy to have checked out.
This is another show that I very much regret not getting to this year, and that I initially wanted to watch, but then just never found the time. So before season 2, hopefully I'll get caught up on this season 1.
One of your standout characters in one of your favorite TV shows of the year, Brian, is a cop. I find that very interesting.
Oh, interesting.
It's very interesting.
Hey, I know. I'll shout it out when it's done well.
That is
Brian holds multitudes, Christian.
Very interesting show. It seems like they bet a lot on, hey, you know how we'll get name recognition? Why don't we name it something similar to like a 90s indie hit by Quentin Tarantino? It's a pretty good idea. So I'm all for that.
No doubt.
That's a way of capitalizing on IP. It's very inventive. That is Reservation Dogs, now streaming on Hulu, presented by FX. All right, that takes us to some number ones in the build-in, coming down to me. So Chris, number 1, Ted Lasso season 2. Brian, number 1, Reservation Dogs. My number 1 is so unexpected. And it's really because it does the thing I love that documentaries can do. Now, this is a docuseries, so this technically blurs the line of TV show, right? It's a one-run documentary, but long form. And it's on HBO Max. And when I list things I don't give a shit about, if I were to like make a list, one of them most certainly would have been big wave surfing. It would have been so much so that like it wouldn't have been on the list, because I wouldn't even thought of it as a thing that I wouldn't give a shit about, because of how little shits about big wave surfing I would get. And if someone said, hey, are you into big wave surfing? I'd be like, no. I don't even technically know what the definition between big wave and small wave surfing is. And this does the thing I love that media books or TV shows can do, which is get me genuinely interested in like the best people at something I don't give a shit about, to the point where I'm very invested in that thing. And 100 Foot Wave on HBO Max does that in strides. It is similar to, I would say it's definitely for fans of like Free Solo, which was one of my favorite documentaries to come out a couple years ago, which is about the man that free soloed, meaning he did no rock climbing gear and just scaled a mountain barehanded without any life-saving equipment. That is a very awesome documentary that I think is on Disney Plus now. So if you're a fan of that, I would say watch that. If that grips you, then 100 Foot Wave is for you, because it follows mostly Garrett McNamara, who is a very famous surfer in his own right, even before this documentary. I believe he even has a video game that has his name licensed to it, similar to like Madden, RIP Madden. And it has a lot of people from the big wave surfing community that are in it. And it also has all the people that went on the journey with McNamara. And essentially the series is about Garrett McNamara being a fan of surfing, being kind of a big name in pro surfing. And he finds this little place in Nazaré, Portugal, which is this little fishing bay area. And what he finds is this place where you get the biggest waves in the world. And he notices that although it's not conventional, essentially it's at this beautiful scenic, you got this lighthouse on top of all these mountains that are in front of the beach. And essentially you have all these waves that come in kind of together and they kind of clash at each other. But during the right times of year, you get anywhere from your 10-foot, 15-foot waves all the way up to they've seen 80-foot waves. And the titular title, 100 Foot Wave, is the quest for these big wave surfers to ride a 100-foot wave. And you're kind of seeing the Nazaré, Portugal, become this spot where big wave surfing has a huge event, and it's something that he builds up, and you're seeing the drama of coming throughout the seasons and what happens. And it turns out riding a 70-foot wave is a little dangerous of an event.
Go figure.
Because it's so gigantic, and you see some of like the toll it takes on people. And a lot of what the show is about is like, what's it worth? Like anything. And I think so much of this can be attributed to like pretty much any endeavor, especially ones that are in these extreme sports things that are like, you're trying to make your name for what, and what's it worth, and what is, I mean, the end of the show is kind of cliche in the way of like, what is the quote unquote 100-foot wave? But I think it does it so well just based on the amount of footage. Like there's a trend outside of Yellow Jackets of the things that I liked, which is things that are hard to replicate, which is shit that takes 6 years to make. And this legitimately is footage from like the late 2000, the aughts, and if from 2010 to present day, where like literally the documentary ends because it's like the pandemic happened and then we couldn't make the movie anymore. So it is a very long amount of time, hence the 6 or 7 episodes that you get of documenting all these different seasons of it happening. And it is a wonderful celebration of community, of expertise in one particular area, of seeing Garrett McNamara go through the stages of life that one would go through in, the 15 years that this overviews, seeing different paths that different surfers take. Like, it is a very beautiful human experience that you can only get through documentary. And there's some extra fucking ordinary photography going on with, you see the technology develop with using drones to capture the surfing, and it really, you get a respect for the talents of these individuals, the talents of the cinematographers and how good they are at capturing the sport, and of course the talent of the actual surfers that are doing this and risking their lives for this just spectacle of an event, for this achievement. And not only that, but the respect of fucking Mother Earth, and the fact that you can't like you're messing with just the ocean being unforgiving and how it behaves, and it's not there to be ridden. We're just riding it because it looks cool and because we want trophies for these things.
Tempting Poseidon.
It really is. And there is quite a bit of tragedy that occurs over the course, and it is a very human story. It's a story of human achievement, a story of what you put your mind to. It's all these things that I love, seeing great people with good character who are motivated and good at what they do try to push the limits of things. And of course, it's shot beautiful. I also want to shout out, it was directed by Chris Smith, who put a lot of the footage together, and the music is done by Philip Glass. And
nice.
So this is it's a serene kind of experience to put on. So easy 6 episodes to get through. For me, it was an easy thing to finish. Just absolutely beautiful cinematography, an amazing documentary miniseries, and that is why it is placed at number 1 of my top TV shows. I think it's one of a kind, something you just can't get every day. You can't push it. HBO can't go, that was great. Can we get one? Can we get one next year? You just can't do what they did in that amount of time. So definitely an achievement. A big fan. That is 100 Foot Wave, streaming on HBO Max. And that concludes our top TV shows of the year, gents.
We did it.
It was very cool. Sorry to Disney Plus, you only won one of our awards. I know you were vying for just everything that we talked about.
There's more to life than Marvel and Star Wars.
Chris, it feels so good to hear you say that.
Were you concerned?
The only other
probably.
thing is Masters of the Universe. Yeah.
There is only Motu.
As I'm looking in your background, what I see is a Baby Yoda and a Captain America shield. You're like, there's more to life than Star Wars, but not behind
you got
this
some,
guy.
other things as well. Turtles and DC and stuff.
Is that a Hogwarts
Yeah.
sword?
It is the Sword of Gryffindor.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, wow.
Not a large property, that one.
No, very very small. Very few have heard of it.
But yeah, a lot of great TV. Glad we were able to highlight a lot of those for you today. Gentlemen, where can people find more of your work on the internet?
Loyal viewers and listeners, you can find me on Twitter at Chris Conkling, talking about all things nerdy. Movies, comic books, television shows. Not so many video games this year, but hopefully this coming year we'll have more video games. If it's nerdy, I'm talking about it.
And you can find me on Twitter at True Pop-O-Holic. And to quote Rittenhouse by the great Harmony Woods, even the pigeons are cringing now. This is my Twitter presence.
And you can find me at Midnight Satire. My music streaming now. Latest releases, Not So Serious Man, but quite the serious jam. Am I right, Brian?
Oh, yeah.
Stealing that for good. So find my music there and follow it. You can find more episodes of Pop-O-Holics on our podcast feed. We've got a link tree both in the YouTube and the podcast segment, podcast feed itself that will take you to all our social medias. You can email us questions, comments, concerns. What's your favorite TV shows and whatchamacallits from 2021? We want to hear about it as we enter 2022. Got to catch up on all those things we missed so we can highlight them in our weekly upload, perhaps. Excuse me. Oh, yeah, I didn't tell our listeners that I have COVID-19 and I'm recovering from it. Yeah, what a ball to drop. Get vaccinated, though, because look at me. Anyway. So our weekly uploads.
Poster child for vaccination.
Absolutely.
Right here on Pop-O-Holics.
100%. So our weekly uploads are every Monday during our regular season operations, where we come together to talk about the latest in pop culture, what we've been consuming. So send us in your recommendations. We'd love to hear it. We also do a community feedback shout out. We have polls that run on Twitter. And we also, again, read every single email in our community feedback section, as well as any 5-star review you leave us on Apple Podcast. That's going to do it for the show. Next episode, Chris, what are we bringing the folks?
Christian, next episode, we're going to be talking about our top 5 films of 2021.
Yeah, feels like a lot sitting from the production side of things. But we're going to get through it. Very excited to bring that to you and more on the next episode of...